Hey, are you in for a bit of culture sometime around Halloween? Then why not come see my amateur drama group, the Southend Drama Society, performing The Hound of the Baskervilles? We're at the Dixon Studio Palace Theatre in Westcliff-on-Sea from the 6th to the 9th of November. This is going to be a video of two halves, I suppose. My original aim was to make a simple little video about two Sega games. One for the Master System, one for the Mega Drive. One good, one bad, but both very similar. Good old Black Belt and Last Battle. Simple enough, lots of people know these titles, they've probably got plenty of memories of them, good and bad, and I get to talk about an insanely popular license in the bargain. But then there's the real oddity. How on earth did Last Battle end up on UK microcomputers? And well, that took me down another rabbit hole entirely. A whole bunch of Sega Mega Drive games that somehow ended up on platforms like the Amiga, the C64, even the Amstrad and the ZX Spectrum. Such treasure troves are why making these videos is pretty awesome. But to start things off, well, let's do the video I was going to make first. Black Belt and Last Battle. The story of these classic, some might call them that I suppose, Sega games. And obviously we can't not talk about the license they spawned from first. A lot of you probably know that both Black Belt and Last Battle are Western localizations of Japanese games based on the manga and anime series Hokuto no Ken, or as it's generally known over here, Fist of the North Star. Well aside from various places in Europe where it's called Ken the Survivor, particularly France. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on anime, it's not my field, but this is definitely something I can get behind. Hokuto no Ken is a post-apocalyptic tale focusing on the adventures of Kenshiro, master of the martial art of Hokuto Shinken. He protects the weak from Gan's roamingly irradiated wastelands with a ruthless streak. Those who warn Kenshiro are, more often than not, likely to be met with 100 or so rapid-fire punches and kicks delivered to their hidden pressure points. They may laugh it off, thinking that all those hits and screams of "Atatatatatatat" didn't amount to much. But then Ken says those magic words, "Ome wa mo shinderu," meaning, you are already dead. Anyone who hears this is probably about to suddenly blow up, violently and graphically, from the inside, especially if they answer with a baffled shout of, "Nani?" Now there's obviously a lot more to Hokuto no Ken than all of that, but these are the immediate elements that make the story pretty bloody awesome, one of those that managed to easily break out of Japan and become famous the world over. I didn't actually realise just how huge a franchise it is. Between the original manga and TV show, films, merch, games, pachinko and so on, it's estimated that Hokuto no Ken has made around $20 billion in its lifetime. To put that into context, that's actually more than the likes of James Bond and Toy Story. Not bad. It's hardly a niche thing to be sure. And just to bring it all back, a nuclear wasteland, a muscular guy, a propensity for punching and kicking people until they implode? If that's not perfect fodder for a load of video games, then frankly I have no idea what is. The first Hokuto no Ken game was actually released on the PC-88 Japanese computer in May 1986, and it was a graphical adventure called Hokuto no Ken Violence Kiga Adventure. But it would only be another 2 months until we got something a bit more arcadey and side-scrolling. July 1986 saw the release of Hokuto no Ken on the Sega Mark III, the original Japanese Master System. The game is, from what I can tell, a pretty straight adaptation of the original Hokuto no Ken series plot, featuring most of the famous battles against the likes of Shin, Devil's Rebirth, Toki and others, culminating in the final battle against Rail, the King of Fists, and being reunited with his girlfriend, Yuria. Most of the stages are broken into 2 parts. First up you have a side-scrolling section where Kenshiro beats the living cack out of various goons, interspersed with battles against various sub-bosses. Again, these are also mostly characters from the series. After that, you get a straight one-on-one fight between Kenshiro and the boss that's, well, more of a fighting game. Even if you only have a sliver of health at the end of a stage, you'll still get a maxed out health bar for the last fight. And the sprites get bigger too. Is this game good, Len? Yeah, it's really good actually. It's one of my favourite titles on the Master System. Although I do mostly know it as something else entirely. Later on in 1986, this game was released in the West as Black Belt, complete with awesome minimalistic Master System box art and without the Hokuto no Ken license, presumably because the series hadn't actually officially been released in the West yet. Kenshiro is turned into Riki, a more generic karate man complete with a gi that he wears everywhere, just in case you weren't sure whether he knew martial arts or not. The setting becomes more contemporary, no wastelands here, and the plot becomes a regular damsel in distress affair where you save your girlfriend Kyoko by defeating the evil crime boss Wan and his various underlings, such as a sumo wrestler and a female bodyguard. There's also lots of awkward translations in the manual. Your girlfriend has got herself into a beautiful Japanese mess. And there's the guarantee that Riki will get to fight all sorts of people, such as Rita, the flamethrower, a ninja with a red whip and a red sword. And, dark women. Nothing else, just dark women. I guess Riki has a white hood somewhere to go with that white gi. And, well, let's face it, for certain people with an incredibly immature sense of humour, the name Wan is never not going to be funny. So far, so generic, but the action is still the same and it still plays great. There's a few tweaks to the gameplay. Black Belt is a bit easier on account of the addition of health power-ups and even invincibility that you can pick up with a high jump as they scroll across the screen. Riki sure does love his nigiri. You also regain health by defeating sub-bosses, which aside from some hidden Easter eggs was the only way to get health back in the original Japanese game. Still, even with the backgrounds and characters all redone, the game is basically the same. Obviously the graphics and sprites are a lot more memorable in the Japanese game, which is beautifully done in 8 bits with a bit of parallax even thrown in. The shifting sands of Southern Cross Town, Godland, the battle against Devil's Rebirth where he's actually a lot bigger than you. All of these are way more memorable than Black Belt's generic city or harbour settings. It may be a tougher game, but the Japanese original is definitely better, even if I've played Black Belt a lot more. It does surprise me, thinking about it, that the boss fights are largely the same in both games. They're the most memorable part of the game, and they're actually quite odd and puzzle-like, in a way that actually makes them faithful to the show. The bosses all have a certain weakness, and they usually have to be finished a certain way once they lose all of their health. For example, the first boss, Shin, or Ryo in Black Belt, has to be beaten with a punch, which triggers Kenshiro's most famous finishing move, the Hokuto Hakuretsu Ken, or 100 Rending Fists. As in the show, the move's title appears on the screen when you perform it. Surprisingly, this was kept in the Western version. The enemies exploding into little pieces was also kept in, by the way, meaning that this game had the honour of being banned in Germany until 2012. The bosses get more complex as you go. The fourth boss, Toki, known as the Ninjutsu Oni in Black Belt, counters all your moves. The only way to beat him is to go all the way to the left and match him blow for blow with kicks. You'll both hit each other, but you'll have that one sliver of health more than him at the end. Sorta like the fight against Mouth in the original NES Ninja Gaiden. The fifth boss, Salfa, who gets gender swapped into Rita, Wan's bodyguard in Black Belt, is even more complex. You must hit him with a set sequence of moves, that being jump kick, standing punch, and low kick. You do this twice, and then to actually beat him, you have to wait until he does a dive kick and then catch him right before he lands with a kick of your own. Hard to pull off, but certainly satisfying. Ryo, or Wan, is the last boss and, well, he's really tough and doesn't seem to have much in any way of weaknesses. However, you can glitch him out by going to the left side, waiting for him to jump at you, and then stun locking him in the air with low punches before delivering the final hit. So these bosses aren't strictly like your plain Jane everyday fighting game, but they're still quite a lot of fun to actually figure out. In summary, this game's bloody great, whether you play the original or its non-apocalyptic Western equivalent. It seems as though some people criticised it back in the day as being a bit derivative of the game Kung Fu, in that they're both martial arts based side-scrollers, but I'd say that if that's the case, this is a much improved version of that game's formula, with so much more added to it. And as far as Sega goes, there's another reason why this title was important. It was one of the first titles for the company where a young man by the name of Yuji Naka took the role of lead programmer, which is certainly historic. Sonic and all that. As far as performance goes, it's certainly fondly remembered in Japan as one of the better Hokuto no Ken games, even if the Mark III wasn't a great selling console. I'm not too sure about the US, but here in the UK where the Master System was popular, well, without having figures to hand, most people I knew with a Master System tended to have a copy of Black Belt, including yours truly, so I can't imagine it did badly. Sega have happily kept the game's memory alive over the years. A 3D update of Hokuto no Ken was released in 2004 as part of the Sega Ages series on PS2, although I don't believe that's supposed to be much cop. And the original game is also an unlockable extra in the license's most recent game, 2018's Hokuto Gagatoku, or Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise. For a long time, and leaving aside the Japanese-only graphic adventures and RPGs that the series got, the Sega Hokuto no Ken was the best game that the series had. It's fair to say that a lot of the other more actiony titles weren't that great. Take the ones that were on the Famicom, for example. The first one, released by Toei. This game is absolutely hideous. Unappealing graphics, horrid music, plays like a scabby dog. The Sega game is better in every possible way. But, being on the much more popular Famicom, this game was a success and apparently sold 1.5 million copies. Hell, it seems as though quite a lot of people in the West, particularly in America, played this title back in the day, even though it was never officially released in English. I wonder if it was on some sort of unlicensed bootleg cart, or if it was simply imported by lots of Kenshiro-loving otakus or expats. Toei's second effort on the Famicom, Hokuto no Ken 2, is a lot better, although still a pretty bad average side-scroller. Mind you, this one was the first title from the license to officially be released in the West as Fist of the North Star in 1989, tying in with the original English adaptation of the manga. I sort of have a soft spot for this game as it was one of the first NES games that I played on Nesticle back in the day, but it is very cookie cutter and, again, not a patch on the Sega game. And so we move to the 16-bits. You would think that on the 16-bits there'd be even more action titles based on Kenshiro's antics, perhaps a Final Fight style beat 'em up, or just even more bombastic side-scrolling and goon-exploding action in general. Surprisingly, that's not really the case. There were a couple of one-on-one fighters for the Super Famicom, but there were also more RPGs and graphic adventures. In fact, there's only one 16-bit Hokuto no Ken side-scroller, that being Sega's follow-up to their original 8-bit classic that, unfortunately, isn't anywhere near as good. The Mega Drive game, released in mid-1989, has the catchy title, sorry for the inevitably botched pronunciation, Shin Sekimatsu Kuseshu Densetsu Hokuto no Ken, which roughly translates to Fist of the North Star, the new legend of the post-apocalyptic messiah. I think we'll just call it Hokuto no Ken 2. It picks up just about from where the original left off, with Kenshiro travelling to the land of Asura and facing off this time against the three Rasho who rule the land, Han, Hyo and Kaio. There will be many other named enemies to fight along the way, although Kenshiro has a few allies who this time will help him. Once again, the game's plot is taken from story arcs in the original manga, and once again the game was released in the West as something pretty different. If you're English, chances are you know this game as Last Battle. Even though by this point Fist of the North Star was becoming more known as a commodity, Sega didn't release it under that name in the West. Possibly because Toei got there first with their NES game? I'm not sure. As it goes, this time the English version is a lot closer to the Japanese one in terms of plot. Everyone's names have changed, with Kenshiro now known as Arzak, the main boss Kaio called Garok, other characters such as Max, Alyssa, Duke and so on. But the actual plot hasn't really been changed, the backgrounds remain the same, and only a few sprites have been tampered with in any way. Even the somewhat corny subtitle, Legend of the Final Hero, is kinda similar to the Japanese game's one, while also alluding to one of Kenshiro's nicknames, the Saviour of Century's End. While it's obvious that the Japanese version is a sequel to Hokuto no Ken on the Mark III, Last Battle is so different in appearance to Black Belt that you likely wouldn't think the two were related if you didn't know any better. The main difference between the two versions is, of course, censorship. When you hit enemies in Hokuto no Ken 2, they will explode in a fountain of blood. Some of the game's bosses will suffer even more gruesome deaths in the classic style, They'll expand all over their body and then blow up in a sea of viscera. None of this was retained in Last Battle. Here enemies just fly off the screen, and any of the more graphic boss deaths are dealt with by changing the colour red to green or yellow. Other than that, well, there's not an awful lot of difference really, and so I did most of my capture for this just playing Last Battle, in order to really embrace the game's awkward translation and, well, not very good gameplay. Last Battle was a launch title for the Mega Drive in both the US and Europe, and you know how most console launchers always have that one title that's just, not a standout? Something like the Kung Fu, Genji, Cameo, all those NES sports games and so on? Well, Last Battle is the ugly duckling of the Mega Drive's Western launch lineup, the one that had people shaking their heads, wondering why on earth it was chosen as a system showcase. The game was brutally panned almost everywhere, and magazines of the time even saw fit to repeatedly cite it as one of the worst games on the whole system. Is that fair? Not at all. Last Battle's main crime, really, is plain old aggressive mediocrity. It falls down compared to the Master System game in various ways. Firstly, well, it's just a lot slower. What once moved at a pretty good clip on the 8-bits seems to be quite a slog on 16, with Kenshiro, or Arzak, moving ponderously forward through backgrounds that are pretty eh. This is especially true of the game's maze levels, which are, to say the least, uninspiring and not a welcome addition. It's a much longer game too, split into 4 chapters, each with multiple stages. There's a map screen between each one and you don't have to visit every single location, but there's still a lot more game here than there was on the Master System. Alas, it's just not quite as good a game. Once you've beaten up enough goons for Kenshiro to rip off his vest and get his power up, you're normally best off brute forcing your way through each stage trying to take on as few enemies as possible, which isn't exactly all that fun. Another criticism that's often aimed at the game is based on the high difficulty level. Not only is the game a long slog, but you only have one energy bar. Once it runs out, game over, and there aren't at all that many opportunities to get that bar back up. Indeed, most opportunities rely on you getting through the odd level or defeating sub-bosses, which is a tough task if you only have a sliver of health left. It is possible to get some health back in the mazes by going through the odd door and beating as many enemies as possible before being kicked out again, but yeah, it's kind of brutal. All hope is not lost, however. Few actually mention this, but the game does have a continue feature. After your inevitable death, you need to sit through the game's prologue text, which weirdly is literally the entire story of the game, and then when Legend of the Final Hero, or its Japanese equivalent, pops up, hold ABC and press start. By doing this, you're able to continue from the chapter you died in with a full health bar. Even still, it's a very tough game, one of those games where you die by 1,000 cuts, as even if you're playing well, taking the odd hit here and there and not having much opportunity for recovery can put you in a bad spot, usually around the time you're fighting a boss. Speaking of bosses, that's another area where the game kind of falls down compared to the Master System. A lot of the bosses there were quite fun to figure out, having the puzzle elements and whatnot. Here, not really. For most of the bosses, the best tactic is simply to chip away at them, hit a jump kick, then back off before you get countered. Or sometimes just hammer the buttons blindly. It's somewhat more simplistic and disappointing, to be honest, and in some cases, quite cheap. The hit detection often feels way off, with strikes just not landing while the enemy strikes with impunity. The bosses are perhaps the least fun part of the game and, well, not a lot of it is all that fun. And despite all of that, I can't really hate or even dislike Last Battle. I almost have a certain fondness for the game despite its general lousy quality. I think the music's pretty nice at least, although it is also quite repetitive. The English plot is often hilariously corny, with classic lines like, "Now you have the look of a hero," or exchanges such as, "Arzak, save the world! I am the only one who can save this world!" It is kind of one of those B-movie sort of games. It's a bad game without a doubt, but there's enough in the silly enemies and plot that you can have a bit of a laugh with it. So, yeah, I have a soft spot for Last Battle, in all of its crappiness. I obviously recommend that if you're going to play this game, you probably want to play the original Japanese one, as it's basically the same, only with more blood and gore. and we all like a bit of that, don't we? But it still makes me smile a bit. Unlike the original Hokuto no Ken, Sega have not seen fit to celebrate the legacy of their 16-bit take on Kenshiro in any way, shape or form. And so, is that it? Not quite. Black Belt and Last Battle, all the two Sega Hokuto no Ken games, are both famous or infamous in their own way. As I said at the start, I expect a lot of people will have their own thoughts and memories of them in the comments. Hint hint. But there's something else. When doing my research, I couldn't help but notice that Last Battle appeared on other platforms. Computer platforms. This is something I wasn't really aware of at all, and needless to say, it's something I had to look at. So I hope you're ready for Last Battle on the Amiga. And that's not all. How about Last Battle on the Commodore 64? And indeed, how about a couple of other Mega Drive games that somehow ended up on these systems and more? Let's take a look. Last Battle, having impressed literally nobody on the Mega Drive, should by all rights have just stayed there. But it didn't. And for this we have Elite to thank. No, not the space pirating classic British game, the game publishers from Walsall. In 1990 Elite put it out there that they'd bought rights from Sega to convert not one, not two, but 3 Mega Drive games to computers, and not just to 16-bit platforms like the Amiga and the Atari ST, but even to 8-bit platforms like the C64 and Spectrum. That bit was a surprise. By this point Elite were largely a 16-bit publisher, so the 8-bit mags of the time were kinda happy that they were throwing them a bone. Anyway, the 3 Mega Drive games in question were Last Battle, Arnold Palmer Tournament Golf, and World Championship Soccer, which if you're European, you know better as World Cup Italia 90. Not exactly the best and brightest games from the Mega Drive, it has to be said. Still, now you didn't even need to have the hottest console on the market in order to play its games. The games were slated for release later in 1990, although that date passed and eventually it appears that all 3 games hit the shelves sometime around the spring of 1991. We're going to have a look at all 3 of them to some degree, but obviously we're looking at Last Battle first. Let's start with the Amiga, shall we? Now, what with the Amiga's capabilities and this not being the most high fidelity game graphically as it is, I would expect this to be a pretty faithful conversion. And of course I would be wrong. Jeez, this game is slow. Way slower than the Mega Drive game. I mean, that felt kinda responsive at least, whereas this feels super delayed, and only having one button really doesn't help here. The graphics are very ugly too. There's less colours on show here of course, but the palette is just not nice. Still, none of these are the biggest crime. The biggest crime here is that, no word of a lie, this only contains half of the bloody game. 2 chapters. That's your lot. The game has most everything that's in those chapters, but once you get to what should be the pirate ship that breaks up chapters 2 and 3, you go to the final fight with Kaya instead. The entire second half of the game was not bothered with. The coders, in Paul Whitehouse style, seemingly said, "Sod this, anyone fancy a pint?" and buggered off. I mean, Jesus, who made this? Ah, creative materials. Perhaps that explains it. Responsible for such gems as eSWAT on the Spectrum, or Street Fighter 2 on the Amiga. These guys were the real ones you went to if you needed a port of something fast and dirty. Even if you gave them 2 days to do it in, they'd still probably come up with something even if it wasn't in any way playable. Occasionally you might get something intriguing from them, usually if their star coder, the somewhat mysterious Richard Applin, was involved, but most of the time, yeah, not a sign of quality. And alas, Elite gave the job of porting Last Battle to these fellows. It's not exactly a good game to begin with, but on the Amiga, geez, it's considerably worse. It doesn't seem to have made much of a mark either. Barely previewed in any magazine, the conversion received just 1 review, a very negative one from the German mag Amiga Joker. Perhaps this explains why most people, including myself, were not previously aware of this port. What of the Commodore 64 version then? A different group took on this one, Images Software, a studio that specialised in ports and actually have a lengthy history under other banners such as Climax. This is the one I'm really intrigued about, I have to say. And what are the results? Well, it's not half bad, I suppose. It's still really slow, but then it's a speed that I would perhaps expect on here, even if the controls are still quite unresponsive. It's still a damn sight more playable than the Amiga version despite that. Oh, and guess what? It even features much more of the game. It's not all here, the maze stages have been excised, which is hardly a negative, and some of the bosses didn't make it, but all 4 chapters are present. Somehow, in spite of having way less power at their disposal, Imagers saw fit to include most of the game on the venerable C64, unlike Creative Materials. Not bad for a computer pushing double figures in age, eh? The main disappointment really is that there isn't much music. I was hoping for some rousing SID versions of the original game's music, but the game consists of just SFX, mostly Isaac's footsteps, which is a shame. Still, while this is hardly a game I'm ever going to play again, it's not a bad conversion. So that's Last Battle all done with. But what about those other 2 games? It's not like I'm going to get any other chance to look at them, so I may as well briefly see how they fared. First up, well, how about Arnold Palmer Tournament Golf, which made it to the Amiga, DOS and ST? Let's have a look. First off, the endorsement from Arnie didn't make it. The game is simply known as Tournament Golf, although the picture on the title screen is unmistakably Arnold Palmer. The game? Well, it's a mediocre golf game, just as it was on the Mega Drive. Very faithful in that regard, I suppose. The best thing about it is the music, and unfortunately that didn't make it over to the Amiga. But I was curious enough to test one thing. The most curious thing about the original game is its Easter eggs. Take over 100 shots to complete a hole, and you'll be greeted with either a drawing saying that the game's going to quit on your behalf, or, even better than that, a hidden game of Fantasy Zone. I wondered if the Amiga version would have anything similar. Something that perhaps no one else has ever seen before. So I had a look, I hit the ball many times, over and over, and guess what? Nothing. Not a sausage. The score just rolled over 100 and carried on. What a bloody waste of time. So yeah, may as well just move on. So, what about World Championship Soccer? I already have a history of this game. I may have described it as the equivalent of a Rustler's Quarter Pounder, something that you know is absolute tripe, but that you guiltily and repeatedly come back to, usually when you simply can't think of anything else to play. And here it is on computers. Weirdly, under the name it was released in America. The European version of this game on Sega systems had some strange agreements between Sega, Mastertronic and I think Olivetti that allowed Sega to use the Italian 90 moniker, and needless to say these did not translate over to Elite's computer takes on the game. So how about the Amiga version first? Well, we've got similar music. One thing to note that's different though is real player names. Back in the good old days, most people who made footy games for the computers didn't even think or care about licensing and so on, correctly reasoning that nobody would notice. So while the original Italian 90 had bowdlerised names, this does not. Not that it matters really, because let's face it, they all look the same on the pitch. The game itself, it flummoxed me. There's only one button, so I was unable to use my regular strategy of booting the ball up the field and scoring with a close-in header, and had to pass the ball instead. I couldn't figure out to do anything else other than pass the ball if I'm honest. Pretty much every time I tried, the ball would be intercepted or I would be tackled, the opposition would run up the field and they would score. You'll notice that this port does not retain the lousy drawings and strange goal or corner kicks from the original. It's all quite normal. But yeah, needless to say playing this game was not very enjoyable and I wish to move on to something far more interesting. This game was ported to the 8-bits too, meaning that, at last, we can enjoy the most mundane and boring football game of all time on the ZX Spectrum. This is quite the moment. I can't quite believe that this even exists, but it does. It's 1:8K, so there's even some of the music from the Mega Drive game in AY form. It's all very exciting. So we get our teams together and start things off. Italy versus South Korea. Let's go. Okay. Well, this game came out in 1991, months after the actual World Cup came to a halt. And, my lord, it's horrific. In a way that's almost disturbing. Whoever coded this really had quite the unique take on football. It all starts from the kickoff, which eschews traditional football rules and instead pits two players from each team against each other to see who gets the ball first. And that's not even the strangest thing. You know what's stranger? This game has no corners, goal kicks, or throw-ins. It's like indoor football of a sort, although more like you're playing in a box as the ball bounces wildly off what you thought were the touchlines. So, yeah. Last I checked, the 1990 World Cup wasn't held indoors, but this is still a unique take. Either that or whoever coded it couldn't actually be asked to program goal kicks, throw-ins or corners into the game. And that's not even the strangest thing. You know what the cherry on top of it all is? You don't even need to kick the ball. Ever. Just grab it and run in a straight line to the goal. You will not be tackled. The goalkeeper will not stop you unless you literally run directly at him. You will score. Every time. It's the granddad of 442 soccer on the PlayStation. It's unbelievable. It is the worst football game I have ever seen. And I've seen a lot of awful ones. I think the game's coder must not have known anything about football at all. They must have never seen the game, ever. And then they had it explained to them one night in a pub after having 10 double scotches and an entire bottle of vodka, and then the following day, with their raging hangover, they were given 10 minutes to code the game. That's the only way I can explain this game at all. Just how? Who the bloody hell made this? Oh my lord. Canvas Software made it. The ultimate. The ones we've covered before, in a story of treachery and tragedy. The folks behind Highlander. The ones who purposefully put out shoddy work, thinking that no one was ever going to notice it. More than that, this is the last game to ever come out under the Canvas name. Weirdly, it came 3 years after their previous title, long after most of the names associated with the studio had departed. Ian Weatherburn, the studio's founder, had passed away. It's some sort of crazy and completely befitting epilogue to that tale. Not so much a game that was developed, almost like a lost transmission that Elite somehow picked up and interpreted. The end result should have probably been hidden away under lock and key, but someone decided to actually release it into the wild for posterity. And the wild is where it has stayed, utterly obscure. Well, aside from the odd review of the time, including your Sinclair, who somehow gave the game 80%. 80%! For this! My god. Were we, as Spectrum fans, that desperate in 1991? Didn't anyone just think, why won't we just play Matchday 2 instead of this rubbish? Again, I sometimes think that the perceived quality of the magazines of the time is seen through, to say the least, rose-tinted glasses. And well, that was a bit of a weird moment there, wasn't it? The story behind this game and Canvas's name somehow appearing on it, seemingly years after most thought that the company had bit the dust, is probably significantly more mundane in reality. Maybe there's someone out there who knows the answer. But, well, it's an odd way to end this roundabout video. We started out with a lone wanderer in a post-apocalyptic world, imploding baddies with well-aimed punches and kicks to their pressure points, and somehow things just got more and more weird from there. Such is this strange world of gaming, I suppose. Bye for now. Hey yo, thank you for watching this video on Last Battle, Black Belt, and a whole load of weird Amiga ports. Feels like it's been the first documentary in quite a while, and, well, it has been. For the past couple of months I've kind of had to keep my head down and do content that wasn't really offensive in any way, thanks to some lovely Japanese TV companies. But, well, the documentaries are back. The top 100s are cool, but this is the sort of thing I like doing, so hopefully you enjoy it. And shout out so much support to everyone who's kind of been sticking by me in all this time. It's all love, you know. Anyway, if you like this video, then please do like it, dislike it, or whatever you wish. Do leave loads of awesome comments. I love to read them. I do read all of them. Follow me on my social media, where you can see me post a load of nonsense and various memes and gifts. And if all that even sounds really good to you, maybe you'd even like to go on my Patreon, where you can help make these awesome videos happen and fund my lifestyle of leisure. I mean, hard work, obviously. Hard work, that's what I meant to say. Anyway, thank you so much, and big shout outs to these awesome members of the community. Alexa Jones Gonzalez, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Asobi Kwan DX, Brian Henniger, Chris, Cody Spooner, Conrad Pritchard, D. Zalior, Rimwan Sutter, that sounded like DJ Slope, Dave Cook, David Rose, Dinty76538, Dustin Cooper, Gary Samaden, Geordie Alex, Glunthef, Ian Roberts, James Brown, Jason Stevens, Jace Alexander, Jeff Ladd, Lukas Kuligovsky, Matthias Gramzov, Martin Pataki, Plotter Margel, sorry I keep pronouncing that one, Renvimon, Rusty Kelly, Samir Al-Amar, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Tarek Amir, The Geeky Dad, Tim Ward, shout outs, I met you in Blackpool, and Yerko Operator, and of course all the rest of the awesome supporters, all the fans, all of you lovely, lovely people. Thank you so much, and goodbye.